The manila envelope was gone. Clara McLean felt the floor drop out from beneath her feet, a physical sensation of falling that made her lungs seize. She had tucked it under her mattress. The golden ticket, the visa that represented 4 years of sleepless nights, a full scholarship to Oxford, and her only escape from the suffocating walls of this house. Now the space between the springs was empty. "Looking for this, Clara?" The voice was like silk dipped in venom. Clara spun around to see her stepmother, Eleanor Wick, leaning against the doorframe. In her manicured hand she held the passport. Beside her stood Clara's stepsister, Sienna Wick, who was already wearing a designer travel coat and a smirk that felt like a slap. "Give it back, Eleanor," Clara whispered, her voice trembling with a cocktail of terror and rage. "That has my name on it. My life is in that envelope." "Actually," Eleanor said, her eyes cold and clinical as she fanned the documents out like a deck of cards, "it has Sienna's name on it now. A few calls, a very expensive forgery expert, and a little bit of your father's unattended savings. And suddenly the world believes it was my daughter who won that scholarship. You're just a girl with a high school diploma and a very unfortunate case of lost paperwork. You can't do this. I worked for that. I earned every single mark." Clara lunged forward, but Eleanor shoved her back with a strength born of pure malice. "You'll do nothing," Eleanor hissed. "Because if you utter a word of this to the authorities, I'll tell your father it was you who stole the money. Who do you think he'll believe? His devoted wife, or the daughter he can barely look at since her mother died?" Sienna stepped forward, leaning into Clara's ear. "Don't worry, Clara. I'll send you a postcard from London. Maybe you can find a nice job cleaning houses. I hear you're already very practiced at it here." As the front door slammed shut and the sound of the taxi faded into the distance, Clara sank to the floor of her empty room. The silence was deafening. She was 18, penniless, and her identity had been surgically removed and handed to a girl who didn't know the first thing about sacrifice. How does a person survive when their entire future is stolen in broad daylight? How do you breathe when the people meant to protect you are the ones who buried you alive? Before we dive deeper into this journey of betrayal and the incredible transformation that follows, I want to take a moment to say hello to all of you. Welcome to the channel. It is truly an honor to have you here. I'm so curious, where are you watching from today? Drop your country or city in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Also, how are you truly doing today? I hope life is being kind to you. If you haven't joined our community yet, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support is the fuel that allows me to bring these emotional journeys to life, and we have so many more stories of resilience to share. Clara stared at the dust motes dancing in the light of the window. She had two choices. She could wither away in this house of ghosts, or she could become someone so powerful that the name Clara McLean would one day make Eleanor Wick tremble. But as she looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror, she had to ask herself, how far was she willing to go to get her life back? And what happens when the girl who was erased finally decides to write her own ending? The fire was lit. And 7 years later that fire was going to burn the Wick Empire to the ground. For 3 days after the theft, Clara didn't eat. She lived in a state of suspended animation, moving through the drafty hallways of the McLean estate like a ghost. Her father, Arthur McLean, was a man of fading prestige and weakening resolve. He had once been a titan of industry, but grief over Clara's biological mother had left him hollow, a shell that Eleanor Wick had expertly filled with her own manipulative presence. Arthur avoided Clara's eyes at dinner. He knew. Deep down in the marrow of his bones, he knew his wife had committed a soul-crushing atrocity, but he was too tired to fight. He preferred the quiet lie of Eleanor's management to the loud, messy truth of his daughter's ruin. "You should be happy for your sister, Clara," Arthur muttered, staring into his scotch. "Sienna has the social grace to represent this family abroad. You are always too academic, too intense. You'll find something else." Clara gripped her fork until her knuckles turned white. Her deepest desire wasn't just the education. It was the validation. She wanted the world to see her as more than the unfortunate daughter. She feared, more than death, becoming a footnote in someone else's success story. That night, Clara packed a single duffel bag. She didn't need much, just her mother's old silver locket and the notebook filled with her original research on international trade law, the very work that had won her the stolen scholarship. As she climbed out the window, she caught sight of the house's gardener, Elias Thorne. Elias was a man of few words, a weathered veteran who had seen the rise and fall of families like the McLeans for decades. He was the only person who had ever looked at Clara with genuine respect. "You're leaving," Elias said, appearing from the shadows of the hedges. "It wasn't a question. There's nothing left for me here, Elias. They took my name. They took my seat at the table." Elias reached into his heavy canvas jacket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. He handed her a stack of crumpled bills, his savings. "Then go make a new table, Clara. A bigger one. One where they aren't invited." "I can't take this," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "Take it. It's an investment," Elias replied, a rare, grim smile touching his lips. "I know talent when I see it. You've got a mind that works like a clock, girl. Don't let them rust it." Clara took the bus to the city, the neon lights of the terminal blurring through her tears. She found a job at a 24-hour diner, scrubbing floors during the graveyard shift and sleeping in a cramped room above a laundromat. But Clara McLean didn't just scrub floors. She listened. She listened to the businessmen who came in at 3 a.m., exhausted and loose-lipped about their market failures. She spent her breaks in the public library, teaching herself the nuances of digital arbitrage and venture capital. While Sienna was posting photos of her champagne-soaked life in London, using Clara's identity, Clara was building a ghost. She discovered she had a terrifyingly sharp instinct for numbers. She could see patterns in the market before they manifested. Under a pseudonym, The Architect, she began posting anonymous market analyses on underground forums. Within 2 years, her insights were being whispered about in the boardrooms of firms she wasn't even allowed to enter. Her motivation shifted from mere survival to a cold, calculated ambition. She wasn't just building a career, she was building a cage. Every dollar she saved, every contact she made in the shadows, was a brick in the wall she was constructing around the wicks. She had a secret, though, one she kept even from herself. In the quiet hours of the morning, she would search for news of Sienna. Not out of jealousy but out of a need to see how the imposter was faring. Sienna was struggling. The grades were failing, the scandals were mounting, and Eleanor was funneling more of Arthur's dwindling wealth to keep the charade afloat. Clara realized then that the stolen visa was a ticking time bomb. Sienna didn't have the intellect to sustain the lie, and Eleanor didn't have the foresight to see the end. "I have to ask you all, have you ever had something stolen from you? Not just an object but an opportunity? A dream? How did you handle that betrayal? I'd love to read your stories in the comments. We are a community that grows through sharing our struggles. And if you're finding strength in Clara's journey so far, please make sure to subscribe. It helps us keep telling stories of the underdogs who refuse to stay down. As the years bled into one another, Clara's physical appearance changed. The soft, vulnerable girl with the messy ponytail was replaced by a woman with a sharp bob, tailored suits bought from thrift stores and altered by hand, and eyes that looked like they had seen the beginning and end of the world. She was no longer Clara McLean, the victim. She was becoming something the Wicks could never have imagined. She was becoming their greatest creditor. By year 5, the Architect had a face and a firm, Astrius Holdings. And by year 7, Astrius was ready to go public. The stage was set for the International Global Trade Summit in Singapore, the very event where Sienna Wick, now a consultant for her father's failing firm, was expected to make a desperate plea for a bailout. Clara stood in her high-rise office, looking out at the skyline. She held a ticket in her hand, not a stolen one this time but one with her own name printed in gold. The unexpected wasn't just coming. It was already in the room. The grand ballroom of the Marina Bay Sands was a sea of crystal chandeliers and predator-like ambition. This was the International Global Trade Summit, where empires were consolidated and the weak were quietly liquidated over hors d'oeuvres. Clara stood at the edge of the balcony, her silhouette sharp against the Singapore skyline. She wore a gown of midnight blue silk that moved like water, a far cry from the grease-stained apron she'd worn 7 years ago. Her transformation was complete. She wasn't just Clara anymore. She was Clara Sterling, the CEO of Astrius Holdings. "The board is nervous, Clara," a voice murmured behind her. She turned to see Julian Hunt, her chief operating officer. Julian was a man who looked like he'd been carved out of granite. Sharp jaw, piercing gray eyes, and a reputation for being the most ruthless negotiator in London. They had met 3 years prior in a high-stakes bidding war where Clara had outmaneuvered him so thoroughly he had walked into her office the next day and demanded a job. There was an undeniable, simmering tension between them, a mutual respect that often sparked into something more dangerous during late-night strategy sessions. "The board is always nervous, Julian. It's their natural state," Clara replied, her voice cool and steady. They heard the rumors. Julian stepped closer, his scent of sandalwood and expensive espresso grounding her. "That you're planning to acquire McLean Global. It's a sinking ship, Clara. Why would you want their debt?" "Because," Clara said, her eyes fixated on the entrance of the ballroom, "I don't just want their debt. I want their name." At that moment the heavy oak doors swung open. A hush fell over the immediate area as the McLean delegation arrived. Arthur McLean looked ancient, his gait unsteady. Eleanor Wick walked beside him, her face a mask of Botox and desperation, clutching her pearls like a rosary. And then there was Sienna. Sienna Wick, using the name Clara McLean, looked brittle. The 7 years of living a lie had etched lines of anxiety into her face that no amount of makeup could hide. She was the guest of honor for a panel on young innovators, a spot earned entirely on the back of the stolen research papers Eleanor had submitted in her name years ago. The inciting incident didn't happen with a shout. It happened with a glass of champagne. Clara glided toward them, Julian a silent shadow at her side. As she intercepted their path, Eleanor's eyes swept over her with the dismissive arrogance of the wealthy, until they hit Clara's face. The color drained from Eleanor's skin instantly. Her glass tilted, champagne spilling onto her silk shoes. "You," she breathed, the word a strangled gasp. "Good evening, Eleanor." "Father," Clara said, her voice a calm blade. She turned her gaze to Sienna, who looked as if she had just seen a ghost. "And hello, Clara. I trust your time at Oxford was as illuminating as you hoped." "Clara," Arthur stammered, squinting through his glasses. Is that you?" "My name is Clara Sterling now, Father. But I believe your daughter here is still using my birth certificate." The surrounding guests began to whisper. The tension was a living thing vibrating between them. "I don't know what you're talking about," Sienna hissed, her voice cracking. "Security. This woman is harassing us." "Security won't help you, Sienna." Julian Hunt stepped forward, his presence looming. "In fact, Miss Sterling is the primary keynote speaker for this event. She also happens to be the woman who just purchased 60% of your father's outstanding high-interest debt this morning. Which means, effectively, she owns you." The revelation hit like a physical blow. Arthur staggered, and Eleanor had to grab his arm to keep him upright. The very girl they had discarded, the girl they had stripped of her identity and her future, was now the only thing standing between them and total ruin. But the real twist was yet to come. As the crowd watched the drama unfold, a man in a dark suit approached the group, Caleb Vane, a senior investigator for the International Academic Integrity Board. "Excuse me," Vane said, his eyes moving between Sienna and Clara. "We've received an anonymous tip regarding the credentials of the young woman representing McLean Global. There are allegations of identity theft and document forgery dating back 7 years." Clara felt a surge of adrenaline. She hadn't sent that tip. She had planned to reveal the truth on her own terms in her own time. Someone else was playing the game. She glanced at Julian. His expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something. Protection? Or his own hidden agenda? The room felt like it was shrinking. The secret that had defined Clara's life for nearly a decade was no longer hers to control. It was out in the open, raw and bleeding. "This is a mistake," Eleanor shrieked, her composure finally shattering. "My daughter is a genius. She earned that visa. Then she won't mind providing a fresh DNA sample to verify her identity against the original application records," Vane replied calmly. Sienna looked at the exit, her eyes wide with animal panic. She knew the game was up. And Clara? Clara realized that the unexpected wasn't just her success. It was the fact that someone had been watching her all along, waiting for this exact moment to strike. Before we see how Clara navigates this explosion, I have to ask, who do you think sent that anonymous tip? Was it Julian? Or perhaps someone from Clara's past we haven't met yet? Tell me your theories in the comments. And if you're holding your breath for the next part, make sure you've subscribed so you don't miss the fallout. Clara leaned in close to her stepmother, smelling the sour scent of fear on the woman. 7 years, Eleanor. I spent 7 years building a world where you don't exist. Now I'm going to watch yours disappear. The hunt had officially begun. The ballroom didn't just go quiet. It became a vacuum. The security guards didn't move toward Clara. They moved toward Sienna. The identity theft accusation was a death knell in a room full of people whose entire lives were built on the sanctity of contracts and verified signatures. Julian, Clara whispered as they retreated to a private alcove overlooking the garden, did you send that tip to the integrity board? Julian leaned against the marble railing, his shadow stretching long and imposing. I told you, Clara, I protect my investments. McLean Global was a liability as long as that fraud was attached to it. I just accelerated the cleaning process. I wanted to be the one to tell them, she said, her chest tightening. I wanted to see the look on Eleanor's face when I took it all back manually. You're playing for vengeance, Julian said, his voice dropping an octave as he stepped into her personal space. He reached out, his thumb grazing the line of her jaw, a rare electric touch that made her breath hitch. I'm playing for your future. There's a difference. If you want to be the queen of this industry, you can't have your hands stained by the initial mess. Let the investigators be the villains. You just be the savior. The tension between them was no longer just professional. It was a friction of two souls who had both survived fires. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that Julian was keeping his own secrets. Why was he so invested in her purity in this deal? Over the next 48 hours, the tension escalated into a full-blown international scandal. The news broke. The McLean heiress is a fraud. Sienna and Eleanor were holed up in a luxury hotel suite, barred from leaving the country while the DNA verification was processed. Arthur McLean had suffered a minor heart attack from the stress and was under guard in a local hospital. Clara visited him. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and regret. Arthur looked small in the bed, his skin the color of parchment. Clara, he wheezed, reaching out a trembling hand. I didn't know the extent. I thought Eleanor just helped with the paperwork. You knew, Father, Clara said, standing at the foot of the bed, her heart a cold stone. You knew I was the one who studied until 4 a.m. You knew Sienna couldn't point to Oxford on a map. You chose the easy life with a cruel woman over the hard truth of your own daughter. Please, he begged. Astreus, your company. You bought the debt. You can save the family home. Don't let Eleanor go to prison. She's all I have. She's the woman who stole my life and you're asking me to save her? Clara felt a bitter laugh bubble up. I'm not here to save the family, Father. I'm here to audit it. As she left the hospital, she was intercepted by Eleanor in the lobby. The woman looked haggard, her designer scarf frayed. You think you've won? Eleanor hissed, cornering Clara near the elevators. You think Julian Hunt is on your side? Wake up, Claire. Julian's father was the one your father bankrupted 20 years ago. Why do you think he sought you out? Why do you think he's been helping you build Astreus? The floor felt like it was shifting again. Red herrings. False clues. Claire's mind raced. Julian had never mentioned his father. He had claimed he was self-made, a shark from the London docks. You're lying, Clara said, though her heart was pounding against her ribs. Am I? Check the records. Check the Hunt name in the McLean archives. He's not here to help you get revenge on us, Clara. He's using you to dismantle the McLean legacy so he can piss on the ashes. You're just his most beautiful tool. Clara spent the night in her office, surrounded by glowing screens. She began to dig, not into the wicks but into Julian. She looked for the Hunt connection Eleanor had mentioned. The deeper she went, the more she found things that didn't add up. Julian had funded Astreus's first major acquisition through a shell company based in the Cayman Islands. A shell company that, when traced through 7 layers of digital encryption, led back to a trust fund titled the Hunt Restitution Project. Was he her partner or was he her puppet master? The romantic tension that had been building, the late-night dinners, the shared glances, the way he seemed to know her thoughts before she spoke them, now felt like a calculated strategy. She felt a wave of frustration. She had spent 7 years ensuring no one could ever trick her again, yet she might have walked right into a trap set by the only man she had allowed herself to trust. But there was another obstacle. Sienna, backed into a corner, had gone rogue. She had called a press conference for the following morning, claiming she had evidence that Clara was the one who had forged the documents to frame her. It was a desperate, illogical move, but in the court of public opinion, a loud lie often traveled faster than a quiet truth. Clara sat in the dark, the weight of the world on her shoulders. She was being attacked from the front by her past and potentially betrayed from the side by her future. I have to check in with you all. Have you ever felt like just as you were about to reach the finish line someone tripped you? Clara is facing a double betrayal here. Do you think Julian is really seeking revenge, or is Eleanor just trying to sow discord to save herself? Leave a comment with Team Julian or Team Clara, and let's see where your loyalty lies. And don't forget to subscribe. The midpoint revelation is about to change everything. Clara stood up and smoothed her skirt. She wasn't the 18-year-old girl under the mattress anymore. She was the architect. And if Julian was playing a game, she was going to change the rules. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in 7 years. Elias, she said when the gardener answered. I need you to find something in the old shed. Behind the loose floorboard where I used to hide my mother's journals. There's a second manila envelope. The one Eleanor didn't find. The real game was about to begin. The second manila envelope arrived via a private courier at 3 a.m. Clara sat on the floor of her hotel suite, the city lights of Singapore bleeding through the floor-to-ceiling windows. With trembling hands she broke the wax seal. Inside wasn't just a backup of her visa. It was a recorded confession. A digital recorder her mother had kept in the final months of her life, hidden away for Clara's eyes only. Clara pressed play. Her mother's voice, thin but resolute, filled the room. Clara, if you're listening to this, it means Arthur has let Eleanor into our lives. You need to know. Eleanor isn't just a socialite looking for a husband. He was my nurse. And the illness that took me? It wasn't natural. Check the vials in the basement safe, the ones Arthur doesn't know exist. The air left Clara's lungs. It wasn't just a stolen visa. It was a stolen life. A stolen mother. The stakes hadn't just been raised. They had been catapulted into the realm of a criminal conspiracy. You're up late. Clara jumped, slamming the laptop shut. Julian stood in the doorway of the suite, his tie loosened, looking every bit the weary warrior. He held 2 glasses of amber liquid. Eleanor told me about your father, Julian, Clara said, her voice a low, dangerous hum. She said he was bankrupted by the McLeans. She said you're using me to burn my father's legacy to the ground. Julian didn't flinch. He walked over and set the drinks on the coffee table, then sat on the edge of the sofa, inches from her. My father was a good man, Clara. He was a partner at McLean Global. When your father's grief made him reckless, he made my father the scapegoat for a multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme that Eleanor actually orchestrated. My father died in a prison cell because he was too loyal to point the finger at a grieving widower and his new wife. He leaned in, his gray eyes burning with an intensity that made Clara's heart hammer. But I didn't seek you out for revenge. I sought you out because I saw a girl in a diner 3 years ago who was analyzing market trends on a paper napkin. I didn't know you were a McLean then. I just saw a genius who had been discarded by the world. When I realized who you were, I didn't see a target. I saw a partner. Someone who understood the weight of a stolen legacy. He reached out, taking her hand. His skin was warm, a stark contrast to the cold revelation in her mother's recording. I'm not burning the McLean name, Clara. I'm trying to return it to its rightful owner. To you. The vulnerability in his voice shattered the last of her defenses. For the first time in 7 years, Clara let someone in. The kiss was desperate. A collision of 2 people who had spent their entire lives in the cold. It was a promise of alliance, a fusion of 2 vendettas into one singular purpose. But as they pulled apart, Clara's eyes fell on the manila envelope. There's more, Julian. Eleanor didn't just steal my scholarship. She killed my mother. The room went deathly still. The game-changing twist had landed. The story was no longer about a business acquisition or a forged visa. It was a murder investigation. If we prove this, Julian whispered, they won't just lose their money. They'll lose their lives. Good, Clara said, her eyes turning into flint. Because I don't want a bailout. I want a conviction. Suddenly the suite's intercom buzzed. It was the front desk, frantic. Miss Sterling? There are police in the lobby. They have a warrant for your arrest. Sienna Wick has provided evidence, That you were the one who orchestrated the identity theft to frame her for tax evasion in the UK. Sienna had struck first. Using the very identity she had stolen, she had turned the law against the rightful owner. Claire looked at Julian. The highest point of the stakes had been reached. If she couldn't prove who she was in the next 12 hours, the architect would be erased by the very phantom she had created. I have to know your thoughts right now. Did you see that coming? The mother's recording changed everything. Is Julian telling the truth, or is he just a master of manipulation? This is the moment where everything we believed about the story shifts. Drop a team truth in the comments if you think Clara will prevail. And please subscribe now. The darkest hour is approaching and you won't believe how Clara fights back. Clara grabbed the digital recorder in the envelope. They think they can arrest a ghost, she whispered to Julian. Let's show them what happens when the ghost has a lawyer and a grudge. The cold, sterile walls of the interrogation room felt like a tomb. For the first time in 7 years, Clara was truly powerless. They had stripped her of her phone, her midnight blue silk jacket, and her dignity. Across the metal table sat Inspector Jack Torrance, a man whose face was etched with the weariness of someone who had seen every flavor of human deception. You've been very busy, Miss Sterling, Torrance said, sliding a folder across the table. Or should I say the woman formerly known as Claire McLean? We have a sworn statement from your sister, Sienna, and your stepmother, Eleanor. They've provided bank records showing you've been funneling Astrius funds into offshore accounts under the name you stole from Sienna. They're claiming you're the architect of a decade-long fraud to bankrupt your own father. It's a lie, Clara said, her voice sounding hollow even to her own ears. Sienna is the one who stole my life. I was 18. They took my visa, they took my mother. Save it for the jury, Torrance interrupted. Right now the DNA results are delayed. The paperwork looks like a mountain of evidence against you and your partner, Julian Hunt. He's currently being detained at the airport for questioning regarding his own financial irregularities. It seems your empire is a house of cards and the wind just picked up. Despair, thick and suffocating, settled in Clara's chest. She was back where she started, 18, alone and framed by the people who should have loved her. Only this time she wasn't just losing a scholarship. She was facing 20 years in a foreign prison. The separation from Julian hurt more than she cared to admit. Was he really being detained, or had he seen the sinking ship and jumped? Eleanor's warning echoed in her mind. He's using you to dismantle the McLean legacy. Had her moment of vulnerability in the suite been the final piece of his puzzle? Hour after hour passed in the dim light of the cell. The obstacles felt insurmountable. The legal system was a machine that favored the first person to file a report, and Eleanor was a master of the system. Through the small, barred window of the precinct door, Clara saw a familiar face in the hallway. It was Eleanor. She wasn't crying or frantic, she looked triumphant. She walked up to the glass, a cruel smile playing on her lips. She didn't say a word, but she held up a single object for Clara to see. The digital recorder. The one from the manila envelope. The one with Clara's mother's voice. Eleanor dropped it onto the concrete floor of the hallway and ground her heel into it, crushing the only evidence of her greatest crime into plastic shards. You're nothing, Eleanor mouthed through the glass. You were born a ghost and you'll die a ghost. Clara sank to the floor of the cell, her forehead resting against the cold metal legs of the cot. Her mother's voice was gone. Julian was gone. Astrius was being frozen by the authorities. The situation was beyond hopeless. It was an extinction of her soul. She had spent 7 years running from that night under the mattress, only to find herself trapped in a much smaller, much darker room. Before we see if Clara can find a way out of this nightmare, I want to ask you, have you ever reached a point where it felt like the world was actively trying to break you? How did you find the strength to stand up one more time? Share your experiences in the comments. Your words might be the light someone else needs today. And if you're rooting for Clara to rise from these ashes, please subscribe and stay with us. The turning point is coming, but the night is at its darkest right now. As the lights in the precinct flickered and dimmed for the late watch shift, Clara closed her eyes. She thought of Elias Thorne, the gardener who had told her her mind worked like a clock. A clock doesn't stop because it's dark, she thought. It just keeps ticking. She began to replay every conversation, every transaction, every move she had made since Singapore. And then she remembered the one thing Eleanor and Sienna always overlooked. They were so focused on the big play they forgot the small details. They thought they had destroyed the recorder. But they didn't know about the cloud. The silence of the cell was broken by the heavy thud of the steel door swinging open. Clara looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but sharp. It wasn't Inspector Torrance who walked in. It was Julian. He looked disheveled, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, a faint bruise blooming along his jaw, but his eyes were electric. Behind him stood a man in a crisp suit carrying a silver briefcase, the most expensive human rights lawyer in Southeast Asia. "They couldn't hold me, Clara," Julian said, his voice a low growl of triumph. "They tried to flag my accounts, but I've spent 10 years building firewalls. And more importantly..." He stepped aside to reveal a second figure. It was Elias Thorne. The old gardener looked wildly out of place in the high-tech precinct, clutching a battered laptop bag like a shield. "Elias," Clara breathed, standing up. "How are you here?" "I might be a gardener, Miss Clara, but I know how to prune a weed when I see one," Elias said, his voice gravelly and firm. "You told me to find the envelope. You didn't tell me you'd set up a remote uplink to my old computer in the tool shed 3 years ago." Clara felt a surge of hope so violent it nearly knocked her over. The architect hadn't just built a company, she had built a safety net. Every time she had used her pseudonym to post market analyses, she had used a secure, encrypted server that automatically backed up any file opened in her presence. When she had played her mother's recording in the hotel suite, the Astrius Black Box protocol had automatically uploaded the audio to her private cloud, a server Eleanor couldn't touch with 1,000 designer heels. "We have the audio, Clara," Julian said, reaching through the bars to take her hand. "The forensic team has already verified the timestamp. But we have something even better. Elias found the original shipping manifest for the day your mother died. Eleanor ordered a medical supplement from an unlicensed pharmacy in Switzerland. The signature on the delivery? It wasn't your father's. It was Eleanor's maiden name. The key to the central conflict wasn't just the visa. It was the paper trail of a murder. The Integrity Board has also finished the DNA cross-reference," the lawyer added. "Sienna Wick's profile is a 0% match for the academic records at Oxford. But yours, Miss Sterling, yours is a perfect hit. The police are currently drafting warrants for Eleanor and Sienna for murder, identity theft, and grand larceny." Clara felt the weight of 7 years of shadow living begin to lift. She wasn't just being exonerated, she was being restored. But the final confrontation wasn't going to happen in a courtroom. "They're fleeing," Julian said, his grip on her hand tightening. "Eleanor has a private jet waiting at Changi Airport. She took your father. She's using him as a human shield to get to a non-extradition country." "Not on my watch," Clara said, her voice dropping into a register of pure, cold determination. "Julian, can you get me to that hangar? I have a car waiting. And Clara..." He looked at her with a depth of love and respect that made the previous night's despair feel like a lifetime ago. "You aren't a ghost anymore. You're the storm. I have to ask you all, have you ever found strength you didn't know you had right at the moment you thought you were finished?" Clara is no longer playing defense. She is the one in pursuit. Do you think she should show her father mercy, or let him face the consequences of his silence? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to see the ultimate showdown, make sure you're subscribed for the climax. Clara walked out of the precinct, the Singapore sun blindingly bright. She didn't look back at the cell. She looked forward toward the airport, where the woman who stole her life was about to find out that some things can't be outrun. The hangar at Changi Private Terminal was an echoing cavern of steel and the smell of jet fuel. The roar of the private jet's engines was a physical pressure against Clara's chest as she stepped out of the black sedan. Julian was a half step behind her, his hand hovering near the small of her back, no longer just a partner but her anchor. At the foot of the aircraft stairs, the scene was chaotic. Eleanor was screaming at a flight attendant, her face contorted in a mask of primal fury. Sienna was already inside the cabin, her terrified face pressed against the thick plexiglass of the window. And there was Arthur, slumped in a wheelchair, looking like a man whose soul had already departed. "Eleanor." Clara's voice cut through the whine of the turbines like a gunshot. Eleanor spun around. When she saw Clara, free, composed, and flanked by the man who had dismantled her financial safety net, she didn't reach for an apology. She reached for a small silver pistol hidden in her clutch. "You should have stayed in that diner, you ungrateful brat." Eleanor shrieked, her hand trembling as she leveled the weapon. I gave this family everything. I gave your father a reason to live, and I gave my daughter a future. You gave her my future, Clara said, walking forward. She didn't stop even as Julian tried to pull her back. Every step was for the girl who slept on a laundromat floor. Every step was for the mother who died in the dark. And you didn't give my father a reason to live. You gave him a slow-acting poison and a lifetime of lies. Stay back. Eleanor's finger tightened on the trigger. I'll kill him, Clara. I'll kill your father right here. Arthur McLean raised his head then. For the first time in 7 years, the fog in his eyes cleared. He looked at the woman he had married, then at the daughter he had failed. With a sudden, desperate strength, he grabbed Eleanor's arm and yanked it downward just as the gun discharged. The bullet sparked harmlessly against the concrete. Before Eleanor could recover, Julian was on her, disarming her with a swift, practiced motion. The police, led by Inspector Torrance, swarmed the hangar from the shadows. Within seconds, Eleanor was pinned to the ground, the cold steel of handcuffs clicking shut, a sound that, to Clara, was more musical than any symphony. Sienna Wick. Get off that plane. Torrance shouted. Sienna emerged from the jet, her designer clothes rumpled, her face a mess of tears and mascara. She looked at Clara and fell to her knees, sobbing. I didn't want to do it, Clara. She made me. She said we needed the money. You enjoyed the champagne, Sienna, Clara said, looking down at her. You enjoyed the London parties and the Oxford name. You don't get to be the victim now. As the officers led them away, Clara turned to her father. Arthur was weeping, his face buried in his hands. Clara. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I know you are, father, she said softly, kneeling beside him. But sorry doesn't bring back 7 years. And it doesn't bring back Mom. The final twist, however, wasn't the arrest. As the commotion settled, Julian approached Clara, holding a tablet. Clara, there's something you need to see. The forensic audit of your mother's estate. It wasn't just about the murder. It was about the inheritance. What are you talking about? Your mother didn't just leave you a locket and a diary. She was the silent founder of the trade law firm that McLean Global eventually absorbed. Because the marriage between Eleanor and your father is now legally void due to criminal conspiracy and fraud, the entire McLean portfolio, the holdings, the real estate, the trademarks, doesn't belong to your father. And it certainly doesn't belong to the Wicks. Julian looked at her with a proud, crooked smile. It all reverts to the primary heir of the Sterling McLean estate. Estrius doesn't just own the debt anymore, Clara. You are the sole owner of the entire empire. You didn't just win, you've inherited the world they tried to keep you from. Clara looked at the retreating police cars, the flashing blue and red lights reflecting in her eyes. The girl who had nothing was now the most powerful woman in the room. I have to know, was that satisfying enough for you? Seeing Eleanor in cuffs and Clara taking back the entire empire? It's the ultimate triumph of the underdog. Drop a justice in the comments if you cheered when the handcuffs clicked. And if you're ready for the final emotional payoff, stay tuned for the conclusion. Make sure you've subscribed because the ending is where the heart truly heals. Clara stood in the center of the hangar, the wind from the dying engines ruffling her hair. She looked at Julian, and for the first time in a decade she didn't feel like she was looking for a way out. She felt like she was finally home. The morning sun over the Thames was a soft, pale gold, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany of the executive desk. Clara, now officially recognized by the world as Clara McLean Sterling, stood by the window of her new London headquarters. It was the very city where her life had been lived by an imposter for 7 years, but today the air felt different. Felt like hers. On her desk sat a framed photograph, recently restored. It was of her mother, smiling in a garden of peonies. Beside it was the manila envelope, now empty, its contents filed away in the archives of a closed criminal case. Eleanor and Sienna were awaiting sentencing in a high-security facility, their names stripped from the social registers they had worked so hard to climb. Arthur was in a quiet, high-end recovery center in the countryside, finally receiving the care he needed to heal from the years of slow poisoning and psychological manipulation. There was a soft knock on the door. Julian entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a thick file. He looked different. The predatory edge in his eyes had softened into something warmer, more settled. The merger is complete, Clara, he said, setting the coffee down. Astrius and McLean Global are officially one entity. The board just voted. You are the youngest chairwoman in the history of the exchange. Clara turned, a genuine smile playing on her lips. And the Hunt Restitution Project? Fully funded, Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. Every family my father's name was used to hurt has been compensated. The legacy is clean, Claire. For both of us. He walked over to her, his presence a familiar comfort. He didn't say anything at first, just looked out at the city with her. The silence between them wasn't the heavy, secret-filled quiet of their first meeting. It was the peaceful stillness of two people who had finally stopped running. You did it, he whispered. You built the table. No, Clara corrected, reaching out to lace her fingers through his. We built it. And there's plenty of room for everyone who was told they didn't belong. That afternoon, Clara took a private car to a small, unassuming house on the outskirts of the city. In the front yard, an old man was meticulously pruning a rosebush. When he heard the car door close, Elias Thorne looked up, a slow, wide grin spreading across his weathered face. I see the clock is still ticking, Miss Clara, he said, wiping his hands on his apron. It is, Elias, she said, hugging him tightly. And I brought you something. She handed him a set of keys. The McLean Estate Gardens. They've been neglected for too long. I need the best head gardener in the world to bring them back to life. And I've set up a scholarship fund in my mother's name for young horticulturists. I want you to run the selection committee. Elias looked at the keys, his eyes misty. It'll be an honor, Clara. A real honor. As Clara drove back toward the heart of London, she realized that the unexpected wasn't just the success or the wealth. It was the realization that the 7 years of struggle hadn't broken her. They had forged her. She was no longer defined by what was stolen, but by what she had chosen to build in the empty space. The girl who was erased was now the woman who wrote the future. Before we say goodbye to Clara's journey, I want to thank you all for being part of this emotional ride. This story is a reminder that no matter who tries to steal your light, they can never take the fire that's inside you. I want to hear from you one last time. What was your favorite moment of Clara's comeback? Drop a comment below. And if you loved this 40-minute journey, please subscribe to the channel. We have so many more stories of triumph and resilience waiting for you. Thank you for watching, and remember, your story isn't over yet. Clara leaned back in the seat, watching the city lights begin to twinkle as twilight fell. She felt a profound sense of peace, a quiet joy that she hadn't known since she was a child. The debt was paid, the truth was out, and for the first time in her life, the path ahead was wide open, glowing with the promise of 1,000 new beginnings. She was Clara McLean Sterling. She was the architect. And she was finally beautifully free.